What if fairies visit Winchesters? The discovery. In the darkness, they could see the room, the haven in which the hunters laid their heads to sleep. Their saviors. Violet fluttered over the dark road to the window, which had frosted over in the cold night air, and turned when realized that her friend hadn't followed. Come on, Lily, don't be frightened. They're sleeping, Violet called, her voice like 1,000 tiny bells. The pale fairy flew hesitantly over to her friend and set her tiny body on the sail. I dunno, Vi? Voiced the blonde. She looked into the other girl's violet eyes and sighed in resignation. They had a job to do, and they were going to do it. Violet balled her hands into fists and rubbed a tiny peephole in the mist on the window, just to make sure the two were asleep, and then jumped down, landing gracefully on both feet. Lily took a deep breath and hovered down to the door. This would be her first ever interaction with humans, and she was scared. She looked at her dark-haired associate and nodded, indicating that she was ready. The two folded themselves up as small as they could go, and crept under the door. Violet sniffed the air. She loved the smell of human men. She stretched her gossamer wings and took off toward the bed on the right, leaving Lily with the other. The younger fairy gasped when she saw the human. Look, Violet, he's so big. She squeaked, landing on the young man's toes, which were sticking out from the blankets. Don't worry, Lil, you'll get used to it, Violet replied, landing on the other. She scrambled up to the older hunter's face, and did a little squeak of her own. He's beautiful, she breathed, placing a tiny hand on the man's lips. He frowned slightly, but slept on. For the first time, she was in awe. Violet sat stock still, mid-air, just above his face, and watched him, as Lily made her discovery. Violet? Lily called. Are all humans this beautiful? She questioned, playing with the other man's shaggy hair, and gazing at his peaceful features. Violet shook her head. No, some are ugly, mean and spiteful, but these ones are nice, I can tell, she replied knowingly. Come see mine. Lily nodded, and made her way quickly toward Violet. He's beautiful too, but not as beautiful as mine, she said softly. Violet cocked her head and went to the other. He was beautiful, but nothing could compare to a human. Violet shook her head. I'm sorry, Lily, mine is more beautifuler, Violet said, sitting on her human's chest, feeling his heartbeat under her body. Lily coughed. Mine's taller, and he has warm hair, she said, lying in the man's mop. Violet raised an eyebrow and crawled again, up to the hunter's face. While mine has kissy lips, so does mine, and sun kisses, Violet argued, indicating the freckles scattered across his nose, and blinky lashes. Lily gave up. So what do you want to do now? Violet stood up. It was true. They needed something to do to keep them occupied until the giants woke up. Then something glinty caught her eye, on the table between the two beds. She jumped down and approached the object carefully. She reached out with a foot, and kicked it. She smiled when it jingled. She liked things that jingled. Lily's eyes widened at her friend's discovery. You found treasure, she squeaked excitedly. Violet nodded. Yes, I did. The two fairies explored the room, until it began to get light, and then they took their posts on their selected humans and waited. Violet sat on her human's chest for almost an hour, before she took matters into her own hands. Dean was roused into consciousness, and he couldn't understand why. Something small was tickling his lips. He exhaled, and then heard something close to a giggle. His eyes snapped open, but he couldn't believe what he was seeing. A tiny girl with wings sat on his chin. She smiled, and looked over toward Sam. Hey Lily, mine has pretty lookers, she said, staring into Dean's eyes, with her violet ones. Sammy. Dean called frantically, and the girls took flight, startled by the yelling and fidgeting. They fluttered frantically toward a dark cupboard and sat inside, behind the door. What, Dean? Sam grumbled, still tired. Fairies, he murmured. Two of them. Sam sat up and looked at his brothers skeptically. When Dean didn't return his look, Sam averted his eyes to where Dean had his. Sam's eyes widened. He could see two very little figures in the cupboard, across the room. He could tell they were scared. Sam got up and moved slowly toward the fairies, and crouched down in front of the cupboard. Come on now, he cooed, holding out a hand. Sam. Dean breathed. Sam waved a dismissive hand toward his brother. Come on, don't be frightened, we won't hurt you. The two girls looked at each other and climbed onto Sam's hand. He brought the fairies up closer to his face so he could see them properly. "Ha, Violet, mine has pretty lookers too," Lily teased, poking her tongue out. "And mine is nice." Sam smiled and sat next to his brother. "Yes, Lily, but mine has better kissy lips." Dean raised his eyebrows and looked at Sam. "Kissy lips?" he mouthed. The younger hunter just shrugged. "Does not, does so, does not, does so, does not, does not, does not, does so, does so, does so." "Ladies," Sam said softly. That got their attention. They looked up at Sam intently. He licked his lips. "Does not," Lily whispered, ending the argument. "My name is Sam Winchester, and this is my brother Dean," he said, pointing to the other. Lily blushed. "I'm Lily Waters," said the blonde fairy, softly. "And I'm Violet Moonshine," said the other. And as customary, the fairies fluttered up to the humans' faces and kissed the end of their noses. Sam laughed. Even Dean had a slight smile painted on his features. "We have to go out, boys. You got anywhere we can change?" Violet asked. Dean motioned toward the bathroom and the girls slipped inside. "Okay, Lil, you ready?" The young fairy nodded. Both squeezed their eyes shut, and then they stretched. Once the girls felt their feet on the ground, they opened their eyes. "Now we're big, like the humans, like Sam and Dean," Violet said, looking at her reflection in the mirror. She was very pleased with what she saw. Her long black hair cascaded down her back, and her large violet eyes smiled back at her. The girls stepped out of the bathroom, and Sam and Dean looked away. "What?" Violet demanded, crossing her arms. You might need some clothes," Dean replied, tossing the fairies a shirt each. They slipped on the clothing and grinned. "All right, you two stay here, and we'll go get some clothes for you, okay?" Sam said, tossing the keys of the Impala to Dean. They closed the door and walked to the black car. "Dude, fairies? I never thought they existed," Dean stated, starting the car. "Well, werewolves and vampires exist. Why can't fairies?" Sam asked, as they drove to the store. Dean shrugged. "Yeah. There's something though." "I mean there, Dean," Sam warned. "They're fairies." "Yeah, Sammy, I'm just appreciating their beauty," Dean explained. Sam rolled his eyes. "Just shut up and drive." "Help." The fairies smiled as the two men left and then collapsed on their beds. "These clothes smell yummy," Lily said, sniffing the collar of Sam's navy blue shirt. "Dean's clothes smell better," Violet argued, giving Lily a cross-eyed stare. Lily just snorted and bounced on Sam's bed. Violet gave the younger fairy a wicked smile as an idea crossed her mind. "What?" Lily asked innocently. Violet stood on Dean's bed and jumped experimentally. She gave a high-pitched giggle as she landed and bounced again. "These cushions are springy," Violet said gleefully. "Try it." Lily followed Violet's example and decided that she quite liked the feeling. Wee. Lily squealed, picking up the pillow and hitting Violet with it. She laughed and jumped over to Sam's bed with her own pillow and stared to pummel Lily with the pillow, causing feathers to fly all over the room. They stopped for a moment. "We have to tell them," Lily said. "Yes, but they're not here to tell, so let's go," Violet replied, chasing Lily back onto the bed. "I hope they're not getting up to mischief," Dean mumbled, tossing the shopping bags into the back seat as Sam slid in next to him. "Them being fairies and all." Sam shook his head. "Dude, you worry too much. How bad could it be?" Dean shot his younger brother a venomous glare. "Don't say that, Sam. Every time you say that, things turn out being very bad." He switched the ignition on and sped out of the parking lot, anxious to get back to the motel so they could stop the two fairies from misbehaving. Once there, Sam got the shopping out of the car as Dean ran to open the door. He looked around the room and saw that he had reason to want to get back quickly. Feathers flew through the air as the girl stood innocently before him. "We don't know what happened," Violet said. "Yeah, I'm sure," Dean said, smirking as Lily quickly pulled a feather from her hair. When Sam entered, he let out a short laugh before handing the girls their new clothes. The fairies found their new outfits constrictive, yet somehow comfortable, and when they walked back into the main room, earned a smile from the brothers. Lily blushed when Sam gave her a small wink, and looked down, yelping as Violet had jabbed her with an elbow. "We have to tell them," she hissed. Dean frowned. "Tell us what?" he asked anxiously. Violet gave him a forced smile. "Well, you see, there is a story in the fairy realm of two beautiful human men who hunt the supernatural and save people from hurting. The Queen has been observing you for a time now, and she sent us to ask you for help," she explained. Sam tilted his head, confused. "Help?" Lily stared at her human, solemnly. She had decided upon seeing Sam that she liked humans. There is an entity, and it's very bad. It hurts fairies and it even hurts big people. It goes by the name of Loki, and he has come to our realm to kill the fairy king and queen, so he can rule over us for all eternity." Lily had started off calmly, and as she continued the explanation, she began to panic. At the end, she took a deep breath and started to cry silently. Dean had no idea what to do, but Sam stood behind the shy fairy and gently rubbed her back. After a minute, she looked to Violet. "Your human hasn't done that yet, Vi, which means mine is better." Violet snorted. "We've already gone over this, Lily. My human is better, because he is older, and because I said he was." Dean gave Sam a strange look. Poor Dean had no idea what was going on. He understood the arguing over who was better, but he didn't understand why the women were referring to the brothers as belonging to them. Sam scratched his chin. "Loki? Isn't that the Greek-Norse god of mischief?" The younger man wondered out loud. "I dunno, you're telling the story here, college boy," Dean replied, exasperated. Lily did not like the tone Dean had taken with her human, so she walked up to him and slapped him hard across the face. Violet gasped as the younger fairy placed her hands on her hips and scowled at Dean. "Don't you talk to Sammy like that, you bad man," she huffed. Violet ran and took her place in front of Dean. "And don't you hurt my human, he didn't mean it." Violet turned around and put a hand on his cheek, which sported a bright red hand mark. "Look, you poor thing," she gasped. Lily rolled her eyes, and took her place beside Sam, who was laughing. Violet stood on her tiptoes and kissed Dean softly on the cheek. His breath caught in his throat as a pleasant tingling feeling moved from his face, down his entire body. Sam was laughing still. Dean glared at his younger brother and sat at the table, turning on the laptop. "What's that?" Violet asked, leaning over Dean's shoulder. "It's a portable computer," he answered, logging onto the internet and typing Loki into the search engine. "A computer?" Lily inquired, curiously looking up at Sam, who was smiling down at her. Lily blushed again. She really liked this human. He was nice and he was so beautiful. He had a pale glow to him, a pulsing aura that seemed to call to her. "It stores information, and gives information. It's like a book." Lily nodded knowingly, and watched as Dean flicked through the websites. He clicked on a particular one, and Violet squealed, jumping back as a picture appeared on the page. She extended her purple wings and fluttered backward across the room, tears streaming down her face. She lowered herself into the farthest corner of the room, and curled up into a ball. Dean was up in a millisecond, walking over to where the distressed fairy sat. "Vi, what's wrong?" he asked softly, crouching in front of Violet. She looked up. It was nice what she saw. The dark hair, the mossy green eyes and his voice, which was laced with worry. Lily looked at the screen, curious as to why her friend had reacted so, and then gasped when she saw a figure, glowing red at the eyes. It didn't intimidate the boys, it was just a shadow with freaky eyes, but to the fairies, it was much worse than that. It was what their nightmares were made of. That's him, Violet stammered, fisting Dean's trademark leather jacket in her hands, and pulling herself into his warm body. He patted her back soothingly, but removed his hands as they came into contact with her fragile wings, causing her to tremble. "It's okay, Violet, we'll find him, and we'll protect you." Dean helped the woman up and she shot Lily a look of victory. Lily just smiled, hugged into Sam. "Okay, are you guys hungry?" Dean asked. The girls nodded vigorously. They wanted to try human food, so they followed the brothers to Dean's car. Violet was intrigued at the black machine, but Lily disapproved. They slid into the back seat of the Impala, with the help of Sam and Dean, and jumped when the car rumbled to life. They had never been in such a thing, and Violet smiled secretly as the black monster roared from the motel parking lot. Visions and nightmares. It turned out that the girls were definitely more than the Winchester brothers bargained for. While Dean was attempting to drive, Sam was twisted in his seat, trying to get the two mischievous fairies to keep their heads in the window and to sit still. Instead of listening, they would continue to giggle and slide across the back seat of the Impala. Sam sighed. He knew it was no use, so he turned back to Dean and gave him an apologetic look. "I'm sorry bro, but I can't control them. Look, there's a diner. Pull up here, I'll go out and get some food, then we can go back to the motel." Dean scowled, pulled into a vacant car space and switched off the vehicle. "Be quick little brother, I don't know what I might do to these two if they don't shut up." Sam winced, as all was quiet in the back seat. "Dean, maybe you shouldn't yell?" Sam murmured to his brother as the two fairies started to cry softly from the rear of the car. "I'm sorry," Dean said softly, not sure how long it would be before he went insane. These girls were driving him nuts. Lily looked daggers at him, but Violet smiled. "I knew you didn't mean it," she said happily as Lily continued her scowling. Dean nodded toward the shop, indicating to Sam that he should move his butt. The youngest rolled his eyes and closed the door. "I don't like Dean," Lily whispered to Violet. "Oh hush, silly." Dean didn't mean to yell. "Maybe he's sick," she returned. Suddenly tired of her friend's company, she climbed over the seat and tumbled into the front, landing upside down, her head resting on Dean's lap. He frowned. "What are you doing, Violet?" Dean asked, exasperated. "Are you sick, Deanie?" she asked, looking up at him, batting her long dark eyelashes. Again, he frowned. "No, why?" She righted herself and knelt next to him, placing her hands on his face and looking into his green eyes. Satisfied that he wasn't ill, she smiled and rested her head on his shoulder, momentarily, before snapping to alertness. "Something's wrong," she said softly. "With Sam." That's all Dean needed. "You two stay here. Do not move," he said, getting out of the car and running toward the store. As he entered, he made his way over to where a group of people were gathered, muttering whispered conversations to their friends. Dean pushed through the crowd, his breath hitching as he saw his baby brother, unconscious on the floor, a film of sweat covering his face. He knew what had happened. "Sammy," he murmured, falling down next to the lanky brunette and pushing his dark hair from his pale face. "You know him?" asked a customer, as Dean lifted the tall man and threw him over his shoulder in a fireman's carry. "Yeah, he's my little brother." "No, excuse me," Dean said abruptly, turning and pushing through the crowd back to the car. When Lily saw Dean rushing from the shop, with her Sammy over his shoulder, she pressed her hands against the window. Violet looked to the other fairy. "I don't think Dean's sick, Lil, but Sammy definitely is," she said softly as Dean opened the car door and carefully put his younger brother in the back with Lily, who was now crying. "Lily, I need you to take care of Sammy, okay?" Dean said gently. She nodded slowly and wiped the tears from her eyes. She was going to make Sammy all better. She stroked his damp face and planted soft kisses on his cheeks, forehead and nose. "Please stop being sick," Lily said shakily as Dean drove like his life depended on it. Once back at the motel, he jumped out and collected a still unconscious Sammy from the back seat and carried him to their room. "Can one of you girls open the door?" he asked. Violet ran to the door and waved a hand over the brass knob. Dean heard the lock click and he pushed his way in, putting Sam down on the closest bed. "What's wrong with him?" Lily asked. "Sam has a psychic gift. He has visions about bad things that are going to happen. They hurt him," Dean explained, trying to make his baby brother more comfortable. Sam began to stir and he stepped back. The younger man opened his eyes and blinked as three concerned faces hovered into his line of vision. Lily breathed a sigh of relief and rested her head on his steadily moving chest, smiling. She looked up at him. "I knew I made you all better," she whispered. Dean sat on the edge of the bed and looked into his brother's eyes, waiting for an answer. "What did you see?" he asked. It was a shadow, nothing more, but it was consuming everything, everyone. Violet gasped. "That's him, Loki. That's what he does. He's very bad," she said softly. Lily whimpered and curled up beside Sam. "I'm scared, Sammy," she whispered. Sam smiled, very softly, and wrapped an arm around her shoulder, pulling her close. "I know, Lily, so am I," he replied. Violet coughed and gripped Dean's hand suddenly. He laced his fingers with hers unconsciously and she looked up, with tears in her eyes. What do we do? She asked softly, a tear trailing down her cheek. Dean gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. It'll be alright, he replied gently. That night, they decided to turn in early, so good nights were said, lights were switched off, and the fairies fell asleep at the foot of the boys' beds. It was about 2 in the morning when Violet awoke, panting and crying softly. She had just watched a human being killed by Loki. She sniffed and crawled up next to Dean and smiled, trailing a finger over his lips. He opened his eyes and looked into her pale purple ones. Hey Vi, are you okay? He asked. Seeing that she was crying, she shook her head. No, I had a bad dream, she whispered hoarsely, before taking in a deep shuddering breath. About Loki. Dean nodded, and wrapped his arms around her, gently stroking her back. She shivered as his hands came into contact with her wings. Sorry, mumbled Dean. Don't be, she cooed, unfolding them. It feels nice. He reached out again and ran his fingertips over the silky wings. She closed her eyes and moaned softly. When she opened her eyes, she saw Dean staring at her. What? She asked innocently. He shook his head. Don't worry, he blushed. Hey Dean, can I ask you something? She questioned softly. Sure, he replied. May I please try your kissy lips? He chuckled and leaned in, his lips brushing against hers softly. She gasped and pulled away. Sorry, he said again. She just shook her head and leaned back in, kissing him. He deepened and the kiss. Again she pulled away, smiling widely. Thank you, she whispered, closing her eyes, allowing his gentle breathing, heartbeat and musky scent lull her to a slumber. Loki next morning dawned gray, chilly and raining. Dean opened his eyes and looked upon the sleeping fairy cuddled into him. He gave a small smile and stroked her face gently. He opened her violet eyes and smiled back. Good morning, he said softly. Same to you, she murmured back, smiling broadly as she pulled herself into a sitting position. The two looked over at Sam and Lily. Violet grinned stupidly and swung out of bed, giving her wings a good stretch, before sneaking over to the other bed and leaping on top of the two sleeping figures. Wake up Sammy and Lily. Wake up. Violet squealed, rolling around in the massive covers as Dean watched on with a big smile on his face. Sam moaned and opened his eyes, rolling them when he realized the other fairy was bouncing around looking rather idiotic. What do you want, Vi? Lily asked softly, sitting up. Violet landed on her knees in front of the pale-haired fairy and poked her tongue out. Guess what, Lil? She squealed excitedly. What, Vi? I got to try Dean's kissy lips. You should try Sammy's, it's really nice. It feels like little fireworks in your tummy. Sam raised an eyebrow at Dean, who just shrugged. Oh, I dunno, Vi, I dunno if he'd really want to. She protested. Go on, geek boy, give the pretty fairy a kiss. Sam rolled his eyes, and leant down, cupping the fairy's cheek with his hand. He pressed his lips gently onto hers and she squealed in delight. He pulled away after a few seconds and Lily jumped up, and bounced on the bed a few times. Yay! I got to try kissy lips too. She grabbed Violet's hands and together they jumped up and down on the beds, sometimes leaping across the beds, landing in a heap on soft blankets. The boys stared on in wonder and the girls began chanting in a sing-song voice. We got to try kissy, from pretty kissy lips. Dean laughed. He was enjoying himself, watching the fairies bounce around excitedly, holding hands, their childlike innocence lighting up the room. Suddenly, while the fairies were mid-bounce, they froze. Their eyes were glazed over and the looks on their faces, shocked. This lasted several seconds, before they unfroze and fell to the bed screaming incoherently. Dean scrambled over to the girls, followed closely by Sam, and they tried to calm the two down. He's coming. He's coming. They squealed. Coming? I'm here. Came a booming voice. The girls were intimidated into silence as a dark shadow crept under the door. Dean held a whimpering Violet close to his chest, and Sam did the same, as a figure formed in front of the four. Well, good morning ladies, the voice said silkily, and the fairies shrunk closer into their humans. You leave them alone, asshole. Sam shouted. Oh, be silent, brat. I am here to wreak havoc on this miserable little planet of yours. I came to warn you for to not try to stop me. Violet squeezed her eyes shut as Loki passed a hand across the room. Instantly, the fairies felt their power draining, their magic slipping away, their beautiful gossamer wings crumpled into dust, and they went limp with exhaustion. Loki laughed, an evil malicious laugh, before leaving the room. "Violet, are you okay?" Dean asked, brushing the hair from her eyes as he cradled her in his arms. She opened her eyes. Once sparkling and full of life, her eyes were now dull and sad. "Dean, he broke us. He took away our wings and our magic, and it's not fair." She pouted, wiping a tear away. "It's okay, Violet, we'll fix you up, make you all better again. Don't worry, sweetie," he said, but there was no calming her. Either of them, they just lay in the arms of their friends, crying their souls out to them. Ended.